to drive economic growth. We'll hear some real-life examples of strategic considerations that regulators need to consider to facilitate the smooth development of offshore wind at scale in Europe and its integration of offshore wind projects into the existing power system. Now, the Baltic Sea is home to 9 countries. 8 of them are in the EU. And today we'll be talking about the cooperation between 2 of them in particular, Denmark and Poland. Both are front runners in developing European offshore capacity. Denmark was the first in Europe to invest in offshore wind, and today the country has 3 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity, generating 24% of Denmark's electricity demand. Poland is still on its transition pathway, but is rapidly catching up, mitigating its dependence on fossil fuels and enhancing its energy security with a pipeline of 18 gigawatts of offshore wind waiting to come online. So today's meeting presents a unique opportunity to discuss the challenges and opportunities for offshore wind, hearing the voices of politicians as well as the offshore wind industry. So, to get us started, I would like to welcome to the podium Arkadiusz Pluzinski, Deputy Head of the Permanent Representation of Poland to the EU.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear colleagues, this is a very sunny day. I hope it is good also for the wind energy. Without any further ado, I would like to warmly welcome all of you at today's conference. This year, once again, we would like to discuss the potential of wind energy in the Baltic Sea, here in our premises, together with PGE and Ørsted. The event this year is also on the official calendar of the Polish presidency, and as such, it fits in perfectly with our presidential priorities in energy, both in the terms of energy security and competitiveness. Ensuring energy security remains our key priority, both in the context of the supply of energy sources, but also ensuring that citizens and businesses have access to energy in sufficient quantities and an affordable price. And certainly offshore generation is crucial in achieving this objective, not only in Poland, but also in the EU. It can also play a big role in the energy transition of the region and give incentive for economic growth. Development of offshore energy has plenty challenges, but also opportunities, some of which were highlighted in the recently published Clean Industrial Deal and the Action Plan for Affordable Energy. On the action plan, we had, as you may know, yesterday an interesting discussion among energy ministers. I took good note that a lot of issues important for the offshore development were also mentioned in that meeting, such as the issue of speeding up permitting or further development of the energy infrastructure. I'm sure that similar and other important issues will be discussed today. With that in mind and without further ado, I would like to wish you a fruitful discussion, and let me now give the floor to Ms. Urszula Zielińska, Secretary of State in the Ministry of Climate and Environment. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind invitation to this event, a really interesting one. I am honored and pleased to be here in Brussels, one day after a very positive Energy Council yesterday, where, yes, I can echo that, permitting a need of acceleration of renewables in Poland, in the whole of Europe, was absolutely a top priority, and there was an overall agreement that this is necessary. So there is no green backtracking, there is green fast-tracking, said the Commissioner and the Minister summarizing the Council yesterday. And this is very much our agenda today. And to focus on offshore energy. Generally, wind energy, including offshore wind energy, is going to become a real backbone of the Polish energy transition, and we're working hard to implement that right now. Wind is already important, an important part of our energy mix, but by far not in sufficient capacity. And yes, in the a new National Energy and Climate Plan 2030 that we're currently finalizing, offshore wind, where Poland is planning to install about 6 gigawatts capacity of offshore wind by 2030 and triple that by 2040. And we're not going to take foot off gas anymore. So you can really rely on us accelerating this transition. Offshore wind projects have a very significant impact. I'm not sure I need to convince you how important, but also wind energy can be a driver and will be a driver to a very much needed lowering of energy prices that everyone talks about currently in Europe. How do we lower energy prices? Well, actually, our latest analysis, the National Energy and Climate Plan, shows that by deploying offshore and onshore wind energy, by deploying renewables, we can decrease energy prices, energy production prices double-digit by at least 13% by 2030 and staggering 33% by 2040. That's the latest analysis. And this is work in progress, and I hope those numbers and this data may look even better in its final shape. Moreover, we are currently planning to hold Polish first offshore wind farm auction later this year. We're doing everything possible to accelerate this transition and also to prepare all necessary legislation. To support this, draft amendment of the Offshore Wind Energy Act is in preparation, and it introduces key improvements for ongoing projects, but also enhancing efficiency, reducing permitting times, and doing everything for fast-tracking projects for offshore wind farms operations. And Baltic Sea can become a key hub for offshore wind energy in our part of Europe, can become and should become the heart of modern energy, as it has great potential. And also, very importantly, as a government, we're very committed to construction and modernization of electricity grids. They can be a bottleneck, and we are aware and are doing everything, including very significant investment, to make sure energy grids are not a bottleneck, and they are strengthening our security and helping us to fast-track investment. Storage solutions are also very much in our mind, and we're doing everything to subsidize and to help install more storage so that we're not losing renewable energy. This is something that is a problem for many countries currently in Europe. We are currently acting and putting plans in place to stop this, so we're not wasting any hour of this great, clean, cheap energy. We harness that. And this is why I take this opportunity, and I'm really glad that I can do it today, to strongly encourage greater cooperation in developing offshore wind in Europe, because only by working together, only by fostering the investment, we can truly and fast unlock this great potential. I wish you a fruitful discussion, successful in ideas in projects, implementing investment that will make Europe energy system stronger, all of us more resilient, more secure, more independent, and more sustainable for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Zelinska. Now, for our next keynote speech, I would like to welcome here to the podium Łukasz Kolinski, who is Director for the Green Transition and Energy System Integration at the European Commission's Energy Department.
Dzień dobry, good afternoon everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to this important event, and as was already said, at a very timely moment. We have just had yesterday the first discussion among the member states on these two strategic documents that the Commission adopted for this current mandate, the Clean Industrial Deal and the Action Plan for Affordable Energy, which basically confirm the crucial role of energy and the energy policy for competitiveness, for cost of living, for security and decarbonization. And they set out quite a few measures in this regard. As was already said by the Minister, I think generally the plans were welcome by the member states, and the message is let's get on with their implementation and let's get on quickly. You may have seen many measures in these plans, but I think, one important thing in the logic of these plans is that they rest on increased supply of affordable clean energy across the EU, and that is, of course, in particular renewables. And this would require accelerated deployment, more investments in renewables, but also integrating them more efficiently into the system. Think grids, think flexibility solutions, and passing the benefits of this cheap renewable energy to the final consumers. Think power purchase agreements and contracts for difference. And all this you will see in these documents. I will focus here on offshore. Obviously, we firmly believe that offshore renewables are a crucial element of this agenda. This is not something new. Our commitment to promoting this form of energy, in particular wind, has been increasingly clear over the last years. And today, in a situation of volatile prices, increased bills we pay for the imported fossil fuels, high geopolitical tensions, and a global clean tech race, this priority remains ever more relevant. And I think there are quite a few reasons to remain optimistic about the future of offshore energy in the EU in spite of many challenges. First, we have collectively quite high ambition. The member states plan over 90 gigawatts of offshore wind by the end of this decade to come online. And member states around the Baltic Sea plan 20 gigawatts out of this, and almost 60 gigawatts by 2050. And this is obviously a large chunk of the overall European ambition, and I'm very glad to say that Poland is a frontrunner with the most ambitious objectives in the region. Importantly, we also see the progress on the ground. Ambition is one thing, but then delivering on the ambition is important. We see this progress not only in terms of auctions or works on offshore wind projects, but also in terms of new or expanded manufacturing facilities emerging across the region. And the recent announcements, such as the final investment decision on Baltica 2, are strong signals that the sector is gaining momentum. Let me mention a few points to which we particularly want to pay attention and need to pay attention in order for this optimism to be delivered on. Permitting procedures, as the Minister said, permitting procedures for renewables, for grids and storage, they still remain too long, too cumbersome in many member states. And offshore wind deployment is not fast enough due to also these barriers. This in turn impacts on the plans of the manufacturers. I will come to this. And therefore, we really need the member states to accelerate the implementation of all these good agreed provisions agreed under the Renewable Energy Directive. And as Commission, we are out there to help the member states on this and to propose further adjustments in the legislation if necessary in order to further simplify and shorten these procedures. Another point of attention is the delivery on the investment needs and access to finance, again, in generation and grids. And we continue to work on guidance for anticipatory investments in grids. We want to take further the discussion on collaborative investment frameworks for offshore energy projects. We are obviously in close touch with private investors and the European Investment Bank in this regard. And obviously, we continue to use the European funding, the European tools such as the Connecting Europe facility and the Renewable Energy Financing Mechanism to support strategic cross-border energy infrastructure and in particular renewables. Next challenge, this obviously links to ensuring adequate supply chains. Together with the member states, we have improved visibility on the project pipeline in order to give the manufacturers more predictability as to the ramp-up needs. We are finalizing the work on technical rules for the Net Zero Industrial Act, which will be important for auctions, for example, for offshore wind and the European manufacturing of offshore equipment. You have also seen that in these documents recently adopted, Clean Industrial Deal and the Affordable Energy Action Plan, there are mentions of European preference in the context of, for example, the public procurement. There is also the announcement of the EIB's grids manufacturing package, offering at least 1.5 billion euros in counter guarantees to manufacturers of grid components and renewable energy components. So in terms of supply chains, on the one hand, we face very fierce and increasing competition from outside, but on the other hand, the announced manufacturing capacity expansions in the EU are still insufficient to meet these ambitions that I mentioned earlier. And in order to deliver on this ambition and to keep the energy bills in check and the costs, the project costs in check, clearly there is more work to be done in this regard, including on innovation and on skills. Finally, I will mention security. We need to strengthen the protection and resilience of offshore renewable infrastructure, particularly in the face of increasing physical and cyber threats. And last month, we presented an EU action plan on cable security, and the work will continue to secure all offshore energy infrastructure, again, with the Baltic Sea in its focus and as a priority. We will also work on improving coexistence of offshore projects and defense activities. You may have seen that in certain countries, certain projects have been held up, delayed, sometimes scaled down, due to, let's say, inconsistencies in terms of objectives of the defense ministries and the energy ministries. We want this coexistence to be improved. The Commission will work hard with the Member States and all of you, the stakeholders, on addressing these and other issues which were outlined in the Clean Industrial Deal and the Affordable Energy Action Plan. They foresee tripartite contracts between the Member States, between the industry, the off-takers, also the generators, and the Commission and the European Investment Bank, and these contracts will give you the opportunity for all of us actually to contribute to make offshore wind in the Baltic Sea and other European sea basins a common European success. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Lukasz. Now we're going to move on to the panel discussion. I'd like to welcome our panelists up here to take your seats, where we'll be talking about some of the issues that we just heard about there in the keynote. So joining us here today, we have Pierre Tardieu, who is the Chief Policy Officer with Wind Europe. We have Bartosz Federek, who is the CEO of PGE Baltica, which is managing PGE's Polish Energy Group's offshore program in the Baltic. We have Agata Staniuska-Bolestra, who is the managing director of Ørsted Poland, which is the Polish division of the Danish multinational energy company. And we will shortly be joined by Niels Fuglsang, who is a Danish center-left member of the European Parliament. Welcome to all of you. Thanks so much for joining us here today. Pierre, let me start with a question for you. We just heard there about the potential for development of offshore wind, and we heard that the Commission is keenly interested in this. What, from your perspective, is the potential for wind in the Baltic Sea? Why hasn't it happened yet? And what's needed to get there to realize its full potential?
Okay, I like the enthusiasm. The potential is absolutely massive, theoretical potential, 94 gigawatts, but I think what's more important, as Łukasz was just alluding to, is what is actually happening on the ground. And a lot is happening on the ground. So 3.5 gigawatt already installed. We know historically this development of offshore wind in the Baltic is not new. The established players, Denmark, Germany have started a long time ago, as have Sweden and Finland. But now Poland is coming very, very strong. And by 2030, we expect that there will be 12.5 gigawatts of offshore wind in the Baltic, almost half of which will be in Poland, right? So, and I think it was correct of previous speakers to point to the final investment decision in Baltica 2 as a key moment, right? We've seen in recent years that taking a final investment decision in a very large offshore wind farm is not a small event, yeah, especially considering everything that's happened recently with regards to costs, with regards to shifting political and geopolitical environment. So this is very significant indeed. What do we need to do in order to deliver on that full potential? The first thing I think is very clear looking at investors, giving them a line of sight on the future volumes to be expected. And in order to unlock the investments and make to see more of these FIDs, giving them a lot of visibility on the revenues potential. And a very, very good way to do that is with two-sided CFDs. Here in this case, 25 years. That's extremely significant. Second, of course, there needs to be a lot of work making sure that the supply chain is there to deliver, and Poland is doing remarkable work. Poland is a very, very industrialized country, much more than the European average, and there are a lot of very good things happening, a lot of investments taking place. And finally, and we talked about this, is the grid, of course. I think it's extremely encouraging that the Clean Industrial Deal has identified this challenge, not only the grid planning, but also the supply chain element of the grid. We know from recent experience that having a fully developed offshore wind farm doesn't necessarily guarantee you that your green electrons are going to be fed into the grid, because sometimes the grid equipment doesn't get there in time, yeah? So good that the European Investment Bank will now be playing a role to support grid manufacturing. So visibility on volumes, on revenues, make sure that the supply chain is there to deliver, building on the expertise of the European supply chain. We need to do more of what we do well, and making sure that the grids are there. Łukasz was also referring to anticipatory investments. This is absolutely critical. We can't be building an offshore wind farm and then waiting around for the grid to be there. That has to be sequenced properly.
Bartosz, Pierre was just explaining that how much Poland is accelerating, that the foot is on the gas pedal here for development of offshore wind, but of course it's starting from a further back starting point than Sweden and Denmark. So what has been the progress for wind in the Baltic Sea so far on the Polish side? What has stood in the way of development so far? And what are the next steps to realize the potential?
Thank you, Dave. I hope you guys can hear me. Excellent, thank you. Great question. Poland has come a long way, quite successful, quite inspiring. Let me also remind a couple of milestones, I would say. 2012, where first offshore location licenses were granted to investors, including PGE. 2015-16, when first environmental surveys started offshore and then onshore. 2021 was I would say the breakthrough year when the Offshore Act was introduced, when the CFD, two-sided CFD was proposed to the investors, the solution that was to large extent inspired or built based on example of the British model. So that accelerated the investors, that allowed us to invest large amounts of money and take risks. 2021, when we officially, as PGE, the largest Polish power utility, and Ørsted, world largest offshore wind investor, when we joined forces, when we created the 50-50 joint venture that finally has allowed us working hard together, allowed us to take the final investment decision this January. 7 projects altogether were granted CFDs in the form of direct award by the president of ERO, so Energy Regulatory Office. There was no auction. It was a direct award. Out of those 7 projects, 2 right now are officially in the construction phase, so they reached FID moment, final investment decision, including us, with Baltica 2, largest Polish offshore wind, largest offshore wind in the Baltic Sea, and one of the largest worldwide, 1.5 gigawatts, more than 7 billion euros of investment of capex value, 107 turbines, 14 megawatts each, so the huge investment. What we are focusing on, of course, on delivering this wind farm on time and within the budget. The COD is scheduled for 2027. Apart from that, Polish investors, including PGE, are getting ready, are preparing to the first auction that is going to take place in the Q4 2025. So the first competitive process in which 4 gigawatts of offshore wind is going to be allocated in form of a CFD. So a lot of preparation. We also experience, I would say, quite an interesting and tough discussion with the regulator concerning the ceiling price. So we all know that the offshore wind is globally under pressure, increasing costs, bottlenecks in terms of a supply chain. So that all, unfortunately, to some extent resonate also or impacts also the LCOE of the offshore wind. So this discussion about ceiling price was a lengthy discussion. What apart from that, I would say that public support for offshore wind still remains very high in Poland, although we start to observe increasing amount of misinformation, manipulation. One of my favorites is that, you know, Baltica 2 will be constructed with the use of the old, already dismantled wind turbines from one of the German offshore wind. So it will be constructed like from repowering, so like a total, total fake, but people keep on repeating that. So we have an increasing amount of this kind of information, and I think it is really worth to keep on repeating the value, the importance of the offshore wind for the Polish energy transition, as it allows for a massive change, big volumes, stable production profile compared to other weather-dependent technologies, requiring less backup capacity, requiring less flexibility and storage in the system. So this is a great technology, and we should, Poland is, I'll be finalizing, Poland is still at the beginning of the road. I would say a kind of a teenager, still prone to teenage or childhood diseases. It requires some attention from the policymakers, some care, but I trust we are on a good track, and partnerships as ours is a good example that we can deliver also in these difficult and demanding times, and working together has great value. Absolutely. We'll be elaborating on that, I guess, in this panel several times. Thank you.
Well, speaking of those partnerships, so Agata, I mentioned at the beginning that the Baltic Sea has many countries. So Poland's development in offshore wind could be likened to a teenager, and then there is Denmark and Sweden that are more, that have got an earlier start, let's say, and more developed in this area. How can these different countries work together to increase the use of wind power in the Baltic? And what are some of the challenges in terms of that intergovernmental cooperation and the cooperation between companies from various different countries?
So maybe I will start from, the need of collaboration. I think we have the sense that this is the time where we need to collaborate more than ever. And I think we have all European, all Baltic countries, they have this feeling, especially Poland, we see how our Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, is, personally involved just to boost this collaboration, to have different dimension of discussion, where in the heart of discussions you have a security. And, then security can define for differently, and among them there is an energy security, which is super, super close to the heart of us sitting here, but we also observing that it's becoming also super relevant for politicians, to address it properly. And with this, with these discussions, we see a lot of also potential, how to position, discuss, share experiences about offshore between countries. So I think if we could, and it starts slowly happening, if we could just share experience, information, and harvesting different synergies that we could have, that we have, but we need to just harvest them in the Baltic Sea. I think it would be really, really relevant for us investors, but also for the security of all of us as a people who are living in these countries, in this region. And it could be in different layers. It could be in the development phase of projects. We could discuss, how to slightly improve permitting, or at least discuss about the, transboundary consultations. You could just in this development discuss how we could find synergies or coexistence and synergies in the defense and security. It's a new area for. Not totally new, but it's becoming more relevant. So with heavier, expectations towards us, how to protect our infrastructure, and how we could do with states, how the states could collaborate to create, optimal, effective way of protecting the critical infrastructure in the Baltic region. I think this is the very relevant dimension right now. We could exchange our, experiences, and Bartek mentioned about the Offshore Act that we have in Poland. I believe that this is a really strong fundament, having this complex acts which address a lot of issues which are relevant for us, including this two-sided CFD. And I have to say that Poland, never had hesitations just to withdraw from this system, which we also seen on other markets, European markets. That they became more mature, or maybe they are still in the teenager phase, and they just, make some decisions which right now we see slowly. Some countries are actually revising. So Denmark made auctions last year. There were no bids. Right now we see that they are slowly just moving towards CFD, also probably having some discussions with states like Poland. So I think this is the good thing, that we could actually learn from each other. And then there is also element in the collaboration which it's related to grid and interconnectors, which is also very relevant part of this puzzle. How we want to just interconnect and how we want to use offshore as a part of this interconnection. element in the Baltic region. So this is between the countries, between companies. I think this also takes time to learn how to do such a big infrastructure project. I think I would say that we Baltic are not teenagers anymore in this relation. It's like a good marriage right now. So we grown, and I think it comes with a great value. So we are very complementary, and I think we are a great example of how companies in region could work together, because I think we managed to deliver something which is super difficult in this reality, because we delivered FID, final investment decision, for 1.5 gigawatt project in these circumstances. And you mentioned at the beginning, in my last word, that, you know, Denmark, they have 3 gigawatts capacity of offshore, and we are delivering on the new market one project which is half of this capacity. So it is something which is, for me, the best testimony of this collaboration which we are having.
Yeah, that's a significant amount. You mentioned, Agata, the energy security concerns take different forms. So on one hand, you have the quite literal energy security when we're thinking, okay, Russia cutting off gas and Europe being vulnerable to that. But another part of energy security is energy prices, energy poverty, and the instability of energy prices that affects consumers a lot. So Bartosz, can you explain how, because it was mentioned by the minister that wind can make a difference in the Baltic Sea in lowering energy prices and stabilizing energy prices. It's a big concern in Poland. How can that happen? Why is it that wind power in the Baltic would make such a difference with that?
Is it better? Yeah. So I just said that it's a question to which you can be answering for the half of this panel. We discussed that before with Agata, and we'll be sharing the opportunity to answer. You said at the beginning, you mentioned security, and let me elaborate. I will deep dive into the impact on the prices, but talking about security, I would say that in current geopolitical circumstances, I would say that the rationale for building offshore wind in Poland has increased a lot. I would say it's probably strongest than ever before. So we have to limit Poland's and Europe's dependence on the imported hydrocarbons, including from Russia and those sort of unstable or dangerous countries. When it comes to the impact on the prices, you know, like most of the renewables, those technologies have very low operational or running cost. So they are entering into the merit order on the very left of the merit order, pushing out, pushing away, or limiting the utilization of the most expensive marginal plants, firing natural gas, firing hard coal, firing oil still in some countries. So the more renewables you have, the more offshore sources you have in the system, you then limit your wholesale energy prices. And there were some simulations conducted by the Polish Wind Energy Association during the discussion about the ceiling price for the 2025 auction. They ran some simulation that showed that if we successfully build those 18 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2040, the wholesale prices could drop by 50%. So the impact might be really massive. And then Agata, I don't know if you'd like to chip in here and supplement.
So the simple reply to your question, if offshore is going to be part of a solution, yes, because exactly, the reason Bartek explained, that the mechanism of shaping the energy prices is based on merit order, and the more renewables and in super relevant offshore is because it's a big scale and stable energy. So if you have this energy entering into merit order, it will push out those technologies which actually are the impulse for creating the high energy price. And maybe what I would like to add here is just what we are facing right now in Poland, and this is to a certain extent what you mentioned, Bartek, at the beginning about the misinformation. So when we've been discussing about the level of CFD, there was like a super shortcut done, in a lot of media that, if you have even slightly higher CFD price, it will cost that in the future energy will be more expensive, which is basically not true. It leads you to the wrong conclusion, because even if you pay a bit more right now for it, the mechanism is that we'll be pushing out technologies which are more expensive than offshore, than onshore. And maybe we should confront also in this conversation about why we need a bit higher, prices for offshore right now, why LCOE increased, and what can we do to just stabilize it and push it down. And I truly believe that we as a sector, we can be again on this track to just push down the LCOE of the offshore. And we need to do this because this is where we started. Łukasz was mentioning, we need affordable energy. In Europe right now, we have the Bruegel. They made analysis that right now the energy prices for the industry are 2.5 higher here in Europe in comparison to US. So if you have this starting point, you need to really do an effort to get to this point. And the question is when it will happen. And I think that we need to do whatever possible to make this happen as soon as possible. But I think that the fair answer is it will not happen tomorrow. We have a really big lesson there, to do in Europe, just to really push down the cost of energy. And I think we are on track. We have some good initiatives, but I think we are also in the reality which needs to be tested. We just need to reply honestly on different questions, when and what can be delivered. Maybe we should stop discuss about very, very ambitious targets and how to deliver, but just make a reality check of it, and this should be a base for make the situation of offshore a bit healthier. And maybe I will pause here.
So Pierre, we've just heard how offshore wind can lower energy prices, and yet we still have all this messaging that shorthand, wind turbines are increasing your energy prices. We're hearing it not just in Poland. That's the message from the American government at the moment. That's the message from a lot of right-wing politicians in Europe. How do we get the messaging back on track so that people understand the benefits of offshore wind, or even just wind in general? And how do you combat this misinformation and sometimes purposeful disinformation from getting such a hold on the public mind?
There's a lot there, so I will try to address that. The first thing is, in relation to this discussion on the ceiling for the contract for difference, if you don't get the ceiling for the contract for difference right, the investments don't happen, in new generation. And so you stay stuck in the old world. The old world is the world in which we're extremely reliant on imported fossil fuels. It's extremely expensive, and it leaves us extremely vulnerable to external shocks. So we saw, with the brutal and illegal aggression of Russia of Ukraine, a huge shock on our energy system, and we saw prices spike because we had not, to be frank, done our homework at yet transforming the energy system into what it needs to be tomorrow, which is a system that is highly electrified and running on renewables, which have very low marginal costs. right? So the people pushing the disinformation there are the people who have skin in the game and a stake in keeping the system as it is, in keeping Europe vulnerable to these external shocks. So we need to call them out on that, because that's what it is. It's having skin in the game, and it's really corrupt is what it is. It's basically serving one's own interests, and a lot of the time using government resources to do that. And so we need to be smart and to do the blocking and tackling, be very rigorous and precise in explaining the mechanisms of the market. But out on social media and in the general public, we will never win an argument by explaining the merit order. We won't, right? Even among energy professionals, it's not a very straightforward discussion. Even among very educated, the very educated class here in Brussels. So we need to make sure that we're painting a picture which also deals not only in facts and figures, but also in emotion, and gives a perspective, right? And the perspective is of a Europe which is more in control of its destiny, which is more in control of its energy system, of its economy, which is relying on its own strengths, and which is innovating, building on the knowledge economy, giving a perspective to the young generations. It's lofty, but unless you do that, unless you relate it to people, opportunity, we will not win the argument. So we need to try and basically connect those dots. Otherwise, we lose the argument.
Agata, I noticed with interest at the start of the Polish presidency that this was part of the messaging, this misinformation about green policies. So that was quite interesting that the Polish presidency has made a mission of trying to combat some of this misinformation. But I also remember, it was a while ago, it was a couple of years ago, but there was a survey about, or look at different public opinion in different European countries. And I remember I noted that the countries where wind power is more developed had the lowest level of public opposition to wind power. So in particular, Denmark, I remember the approval was very high because Danish people know wind power. They know how it works. They maybe have friends and family who work in the sector, so they can see directly how it benefits them, and it's kind of a normal thing. How can those countries with more developed wind sectors, both onshore and offshore, contribute to fighting this misinformation that we're seeing so heavily right now in the countries that are the teenagers on this journey?
I think we are contributing, or at least we try to contribute, on different levels. I mean, you mentioned, people who had a contact with the technology in different ways. They are more open for these technologies. And this is also what we are seeing, if you are present on the north of Poland, when we just start building our offshore wind farm, you are in contact with local communities. You treat them with respect, just giving them the visibility how the process will look like. They start to become slowly part of it. Just we will need these people to work for us, in the O&M phase. And I think you could just tell even more about it, in the Polish context. But I see it also from the UK market where we are very present. Danish, if people start working for the operational phase, because then you need local people, you need to deliver different, lengthy, monthly workshops for them, preparation, just to let them work offshore, because this is such a different work environment. They are also, they have courses in English, so they actually get something which is an additional element. They have freedom to work on different markets. So I think this element, we work quite a lot on this, just to invest in local communities. We are trying to be present, in Poland also. I mean, I have in this room, there are people from my team who are working, on collaboration with, with different stakeholders, universities, MBAs, schools, where we just put a lot of effort just to prepare the Polish society to have this offshore, just to make the offshore part of not only the energy system, but also of the economy. And then I think it starts to click together, and then it's not only about delivering energy, it's about something else. And this is the way we see could just take these people on board with us and just do this together. Because I think if you have in opposition a lot of people, local communities, local governments, you are not collaborating with universities, you are not collaborating with local suppliers as well, trying to prepare them for the journey. It takes time. It's not happen over the night. Suppliers, I think they are sometimes a bit impatient. They would like to be, tier one on a first project. It takes time to be prepared, but we are there to take them with us. And I think this is the way, how in the best way we do this in a credible way. And make it, the reliable, independent element of our landscape in Europe. Because I truly believe this is the way. Even if you have some, people who are just fighting with it, I never heard about an alternative scenario which would be healthy and good for Europe.
Let's talk about supply chain issues for a bit. This has also been an issue that's been encountered with these projects. Bartosz, what's needed in terms of a truly European supply chain that can really get these projects moving faster? And what kind of EU policy would be helpful in improving some of these supply chain bottlenecks or lack of connection?
Thanks, Dave. So I will dare to leave the policy part rather to Pierre, who is an expert on this matter. But yes, supply chain is a super important aspect of our projects. Also, to some extent, one of the sources of those sometimes a little bit bitter comments on our investments, because when we were starting offshore wind in Poland, the part of the story was that it is not only the energy generation investment or program, but also the program that will contribute a lot to the stimulation of the local supply chain, steel industry, shipyards, and so on. And there is a kind of, I would say, temptation that people would like to see the huge share of huge contribution of the local companies to our first investments. And this is not always the case. So the industry or supply chain needs to work hard also to prepare to deliver to the industry. Those guys also have to take some risk, also have to start working together. As an investors, we are often chased and being asked for taking care for the growth of the local content or the local companies. It's impossible. We cannot secure that. So, and absolutely, supply chain is I would say the key showstopper for this industry in the years to come. If we want to deliver more offshore in wind in Baltic Sea region in Europe, we need to have more manufacturing capacity here in Europe, here around the Baltic Sea. It's a must. It's also needed in order to to maintain the cost competitiveness of the industry. We are facing the increasing LCOE. That the offshore wind has been a success story for over the decade. The LCOE has been falling, and in 2022 it all changed. The war in Ukraine, post-pandemic effects, disturbed supply chains, and suddenly the LCOE started to grow. We need to maintain the cost competitiveness of the industry of offshore wind technology in order to be able to convince decision makers that this is the right option. So absolutely, we need to invest a lot here in Europe in new additional manufacturing capacities for offshore wind.
Pierre, here in Brussels, what are you telling policymakers in terms of what's needed on EU policy for supply chain issues?
So on the supply chain, whenever you plan such a massive expansion, there is a need to ramp up. That's very clear, and the best way to do that, and I think it's very important what you said, which is it's not the responsibility of any single developer to make sure that the supply chain is grown locally. It needs to be done at the very least, at a European level, sea basin, European. And the best way to actually unlock the investments in the supply chain is by the EU and governments giving a very clear perspective on volumes. You have volumes, you know when the auctions are going to come, they're well coordinated, well cadenced, you know when they're coming, the volumes, the budgets, you can invest in the supply chain accordingly. So that's priority number one, getting that visibility. Priority number two, and so what comes out of that is that you invest in the supply chain, but the scale also allows you to make economies of scale, to do more industrialization, to do more standardization, and cost decrease. So clearly, we've just come out of a very, we're hoping we're coming out of a very tricky couple of years with the Ukraine war, with the post-COVID recovery, where prices increase significantly, and we need to have that visibility for the supply chain in order to be able to contain and potentially decrease costs going forward. What the EU can do. We talked about the Clean Industrial Deal, and we talked specifically about the role of the European Investment Bank to support the manufacturing of grid equipment, which is very positive. What we would like to see is more resources, and one of the instruments that's been very successful so far has been the Innovation Fund attached to the ETS. But to date, it's been very focused on breakthrough innovation and not so much on process innovation. Yeah, so helping the industry scale up, manufacture more, better, faster, and that's what we need to be absolutely laser focused on. Because if we're able to target the resources at that, we will deliver in time and at a lower cost, essentially. Yeah. We as an industry should not expect everything from government, but government can play a key role in helping along.
Agatha, what would you say would be helpful in confronting some of these supply chain issues?
So Pierre mentioned about the need of the predictability. It was also mentioned by European Commission. So it seems that we are in consensus, but I think we as an industry discuss quite a lot about this. That the current targets we have, they are not realistic. So I think this is also about just put a lot of realism on the situation we are in terms of the setting targets. And I would rather prefer or strongly prefer to have the steady pace and predictability, and it creates the predictability for me and also for suppliers. But for suppliers, what I see, it's not enough in today's reality, because if you go for the procurement process right now, for them, they see a lot of opportunities where maybe will just happen. So if you have the CFD regime, which we've been mentioning several times, so securing the revenue for developers is the credibility for a supply chain that this project has a way better chance that it will be delivered. So this element of just rethinking how we want to just create this predictability in Europe, so right pace, but also the right mechanisms are super, super relevant for now. There is also, Łukasz mentioned in his speech the procurement rules we have, which will be somehow tackled by European Commission in 26. I would rather, having the sense of urgency where we are, that we really need a bit of relief as developers to receive better offers, and also the suppliers need a bit of relief. Having this relief in this procurement process now would help us, not having this procurement rules ready in 2027. So we, European Commission, could actually work faster here and be more pragmatic. We are actually delivering project in a utility directive because we are two state-owned companies. It's super stiff. Do we need to? I mean, our competitors, which are not, we don't have this setup. They are out of this regime. So maybe there are, maybe some small things can be done, which could allow both investors and suppliers just to be in a more flexible reality within boundaries we want to be, which would also create, a bit of relief. So there are bigger things and smaller things, but I fully agree with you that we cannot do this in a suppliers investors acts. We need to do this in triangle. We need governments, and I would love to have the realistic discussions about how we want to support the offshore in the forthcoming decade.
Well, welcome, Niels. So we were just talking about how EU policy can specifically help solve some of the supply chain issues that have been encountered with offshore wind. But in a more general sense, what would you say are some of the ways that the European Union can help get these Baltic Sea projects off the ground running and solve some of the challenges that they've faced so far?
Okay, thank you, Dave, and thank you for inviting me. Sorry, I'm late, but I'm happy to be here and discuss this important topic. We of course know that we need much more renewables offshore if we are to succeed with our 2030 goals, and if we are to succeed with becoming independent of importing energy from foreign powers with whom we don't necessarily share values. And I think that the discussion right now and the action that I expect coming up will be very much on grids and on permitting. So I think that's two main themes that you might expect that the proposals from the Commission in the coming months and in the coming year will center around. So to make sure that we have shorter permitting times for these offshore projects, it takes years and years. We all know that it takes too much time, and when you look at the Affordable Energy Action Plan from the European Commission that came out recently, permitting and reducing the permitting times is a key point that they will address, and we expect them to address. The second thing, the grids. If we have offshore projects, we of course need to be able to transfer the energy, the electricity to different countries. The projects that we are talking about in Denmark and Poland, they will of course produce hopefully a lot of electricity, also more than what is needed by the local areas. So we need to be able to send that electricity out throughout Europe, and that requires an upgrade of our grid system. And here, when we talk about grids, it's also again permitting times. I read in the Affordable Energy Action Plan that there are examples of it that it takes up to 17 years to get these transmission grids up and running, and that is obviously not tenable. So you need shorter permitting times, and I also think you need some requirements. I would argue that you need some requirements for some minimum standards for how well functioning the grid or how solid the grid system should be, how much power you should be able to send through the grid. Because if one country doesn't invest sufficiently in the grid, and that could be either Denmark or Poland, but it could also be neighboring countries to Denmark and Poland, it's not only that country's problem, it's the European Union's problem as such if we are to live up to our ambitions. So permitting and grids, that would be my two keywords. And I would say it's not only my keywords, I think that's what the discussion and action will be centering around, is if I read the room correctly.
Well, at the beginning, we had Łukasz Kolinski from the European Commission outlining the Commission's plans in this area, and he mentioned some of the physical and cyber threats for the Baltic Sea. So I wanted to ask you guys about that. I mean, what's interesting is the Baltic Sea has transitioned from being essentially a neutral sea during the Cold War to now being a very possibly active military zone. And there are concerns about the infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. Obviously, Łukasz mentioned the last month's EU action plan on cable security. Are there concerns actually for the security of offshore wind in the Baltic? Niels, I'll put this question to you first. And if there are concerns about the security, what can be done by the EU to try to protect these assets and guard against, a whole bunch of investment being sunk in that's then lost through some kind of attack, whether it be a cyber attack, a malicious sabotage attack, or eventually an actual confrontational attack?
I think, Dave, that there are certainly worries that we might be experiencing attacks on our energy infrastructure, and you can see that when you have conflicts, even if you have war going on, the energy infrastructure is something which is being targeted, of course, because you can harm a country very much by making sure that there's no power. And I think this is relatively new. I mean, after the war started, we all thinking about that, but this is not something that we thought about before. So we are probably more vulnerable than we like to be. I think one obvious thing that we need to think into our projects is that we need grids and we need, of course, different grids to different countries, so that you need to take out more than one system in order to cut off the power. I mean, and the more connections that you have, the harder it will be to attack, and the less prone it will be to attacks. And then I think the cooperation on cyber defense and the ability to coordinate, that will also be key. And that we are upgrading, and we will need to upgrade that in the European cooperation.
I'll be opening up the floor to the audience for questions in just a moment, if you guys want to start thinking about your questions now. But Agatha, I wanted to put this question to you as well, because Denmark is currently dealing with these types of issues. Do you sense some concern about the security of these assets in the Baltic Sea? And what would you say can be done to reassure those concerns?
I will give you the perspective from the Polish market again, because this is where we are very close to different discussions. But they are actually, more and more regional discussions, and this is exactly the direction we need to go, and I was alluding to this in my first intervention. I think in Poland we see, of course, the threat. We had this sense, I think, earlier than in other European countries. So we had this discussion with the Polish state about how to have the right setup in terms of surveillance, protect and monitor our wind farms earlier. So maybe we are in a bit unique place here. But it is how the Polish government perceives this. It's not only offshore. It's not offshore is also isolated. We have quite a lot of critical energy infrastructure in the Baltic Sea already. We have the Baltic pipe, we have an LNG, we have the harbor in Gdańsk. So we already need to be prepared for it. And I think I like this approach because we just need to be prepared for different circumstances. And it's more discussion about finding the coexistence and potentially even synergies. Only discussing as a Poland, isolated market. But I also see right now that we're going beyond this. And we start to have conversations with Denmark, for example, how actually we could find synergies, if we need to protect this infrastructure in the region, maybe we could use our guard vessels, together. We have the better systems of communicating, of just informing ourselves about different threats, and then how to just monitor it and then chase it and fix it. So it's a very new reality in some sense, but this collaboration in the region, when you have some countries which already have some thoughts, and there is a readiness to just build these alliances, I think it's promising.
Lukasz, in terms of the Bartosz, rather, sorry. In terms of the geopolitical context at the moment, I mentioned at the beginning there are 9 countries on the Baltic Sea, 8 of them in the EU, and that 9th one is a problem. And as a result of that problem, we now have 2 pipelines under the Baltic Sea which are not in use. How do we future-proof these investments in the Baltic Sea? Because obviously the experience with Nord Stream doesn't, in hindsight, seem to have been very future-proof, right? So how do we guard, as Agata was saying, making sure that we're prepared for all different scenarios that might be coming?
Yes. Thanks, Dave. Another super relevant question. The realities we are facing right now. Let me stress again. It's about I would say, the physical and cyber security of the new infrastructure we are building, but I would say that also in the spirit of securing security within our region, acceleration of the deployment of the renewables is a priority. So I would also discuss about accelerating deployment as the answer to the threats we are facing right now. And when it comes to our particular investments, of course, in order to be able to respond, we need to install some additional equipment on our infrastructure, on our turbines. I'm talking about radars, I'm talking about other sensors, and so thanks to them, not only us as operators will be getting signals, we'll be having a good monitoring, but those systems will be, kind of a dual use, so will be also used by the military, by the Ministry of Defense, so the state and different states services or authorities will be receiving additional information, having additional eyes on the Baltic Sea that do not exist right now, that will allow to detect potential threats faster and allow to potentially react also faster. So, installing this new additional equipment is, of course, additional cost. There is a question, to some extent, also maybe that we should attack from the regulatory perspective. Who is in a better position to operate this equipment? Who should be responsible for the availability of this equipment? Who should pay for this? I guess there is a room for optimization with that regard. If we, in the recent weeks, I would say, shifted the focus of the Europe on the topic of security, improving the EU's security, defense ability, maybe some of those additional investments that we need to do today could be financed or co-financed from the EU funds. That would, of course, help a lot us here.
Well, let me check if we have any questions from the audience for the panelists. Do we have anyone who would like to ask a question to any of the panelists? Not at this time. Okay, maybe I might check again in a bit. But in the meantime, Pierre, I wanted to ask you a question. It's related to the same topic. So the situation is changing. And so another implication for these changes is not just the transition of the Baltic Sea from a peaceful sea to a potentially wartime sea, it's also the diversion of funds and all of this new EU military spending needs to come from somewhere. Is there concern that some of the investment that might have gone to, for instance, building offshore wind turbines is now going to be instead spent on building offshore cruisers, offshore battleships? Is this a concern, and how do we guard against that?
I mean, if we're not concerned about where the EU is investing its resources in this time or any other time, then we're not really doing our job, right? So, yes. What I would say is that clearly security is very much in the focus for obvious reasons. The response to that is we need to take a broad look at what security means, yeah? And as we've been discussing from the start, energy security, energy resilience, the resilience of our infrastructure is integral to that discussion, right? If we invest a lot in military equipment, but this is dead. If we're investing in our military equipment, but we're not future-proofing our energy system, then we have fundamentally missed a trick. And I think, as Bartosz said, investing in offshore wind in the Baltic and elsewhere, the rationale has never been stronger, simply because it gives you speed, it gives you scale, and it gives you high capacity factors. So it's uniquely positioned to help security of supply and to help the decarbonization of industry and the competitiveness of industry, which is what we're trying to do at the same time. Yeah. So yes, we need to be concerned about that. We need to engage, tackle these issues head on. But I think it's very, very coherent to continue doubling down on investments in clean electricity. And the minister said it at the start. It's fast forward on the Clean Deal and on the Green Deal.
Niels, this is a question that the Parliament's going to need to confront with the Rearm Europe plan and some of the other proposals that might come from the white paper tomorrow. What's your take on how lawmakers in the Parliament should be trying to get this balance as we're diverting a lot of funding toward defense spending that's going to come from cohesion funds that could have been used for these types of projects? Where should the Parliament be positioning itself?
So I think that the number one priority is security, but I agree very much that security needs to be understood in a broader context. I'm a social democrat. I come from Denmark, a country with a large welfare state. But we are in Denmark spending a lot of funds on supporting Ukraine, increasing our military budget, and we've said that this is going to have consequences also for the amount of money we can spend on welfare, on hospitals, on elderly care, and so on. And we do this because we think it's necessary. But I would include energy in this equation. I mean, I think our project in the European Union right now is that we need to become independent. Independence, that is the key word from my point of view. And that means military independence. We need to be able to defend ourselves. Energy independent. We need to be able to provide our own energy instead of buying Mr. Putin's gas that we spent more money on last year than we actually spent on supporting Ukraine. And also independence when it comes to raw materials, where we're so dependent on China. I think that energy policy is security policy today. When I was elected to the European Parliament 5.5 years ago in 2019, it was called the climate election, at least in my country. It was Greta Thunberg and others who set the agenda. That's a different situation today, but I would say that having renewable energy in sufficient amounts, having offshore energy has not become less important. I mean, I think there are even more arguments, because there's the climate argument, which was already there, but now you really have the security argument, so that's what we need to build on, and that's where we need to invest. And I could say also that frugal countries like my own government have nuanced their position when it comes to we might need to take on loans, we might need to find the money to actually make sure that we can provide this security, because not doing so would be irresponsible from our point of view.
Agatha, we heard from the minister at the beginning that at yesterday's Energy Council, Dan Jorgensen assured that there's no green backtracking. I think that reality, we can see that the focus is shifting, as Niels just alluded to. We're in a very different place right now in terms of EU policymaking than we were in 2019. I think it's impossible to deny that the focus on green issues is lost here. So, as Niels was just saying, that this is also a security issue, that energy security is part of Europe's security. How can developers of these types of projects, offshore wind projects, make that case to say this isn't just about green policy, which is going down in focus at the moment. This is also about our security, which it encompasses a military security.
It seems that we need to be better than in addressing, that we are not only the green energy, but we are ticking actually all boxes. Reliable energy. I think it was what you were, Bartek, saying about, that Poland needs capacity. How can you deliver capacity in a short term? And then offshore is popping out, and in 10 years you could actually have 1.5 gigawatt, or even more. Right now we're discussing about 6 gigawatts by 2030 to replace old capacity. So offshore is reliable, can improve our security of supply. It's also the independent energy that we are, all of us mentioned this. And it is a solution to push costs of energy in Europe down. And I think this is the huge struggle. So maybe also be better in the dialogue with European industry. To what extent we are a solution for their headaches could actually be a way for all of us just to, have a success. We are in a crisis. Geopolitical crisis, also the COVID. So a few years, it's a quite difficult period for us as an industry, but we see that it's impacted not only offshore, we are not isolated in it. All, the production of energy went up. But we cannot waste a good crisis, as Churchill said. And I think we got to the point that we start really have a good conversations and discussions, and maybe it will allow us just to move on and address, what we know as developers, how we could contribute and support the industry in Europe. So maybe a bit better, communication. But I'm deeply convinced that we are actually a good solution because we are ticking all the boxes.
Well, before we wrap up, let me just check one last time if there's any questions from the audience. Yes, we have one there in the back.
Hi, Natalia, Air Power Renewables. I have a question. I would like you to explain whether in Poland offshore is protected against non-market redispatching, and even if it is protected, I am not sure. I believe then you are still impacted by negative prices, and wanted to ask whether you already, while developing offshore projects, think about storage systems, or what we can learn from Denmark, since Denmark is way more mature and experienced market than Poland in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that question. Okay, Bartosz or Agata, I'll let you decide who wants to take that. It's got to be one or the other.
I can start. So Natalia, thanks for the question. Natalia, as you know, the PGE, being part of this joint venture, 50-50, is an integrated utility. So we do not only invest in offshore wind, but we have some great examples of recent investments in natural gas fire power plants, providing flexibility to the system. We have also recently shared the news that we have signed the large contract for the development of the new BESS, so battery energy storage in Żarnowiec, probably the largest one in the country. So we invest in, I would say, broad portfolio of technologies, complementing technologies that would develop and construct it all together provide resilience to the Polish energy system. So this would be part of my answer here.
Agatha, did you want to come in as well, or?
No, I think that, you know, in this redispatching, I don't feel it, you know, expert on it. We have it in the priority in the first round. It might change. This is not the. It's more question probably to Energy Regulatory Office, to the TSO, how they want to see and navigate. From my perspective, I think what is relevant, we need both, and offshore and onshore. We need solar, we need batteries, because we need more flexible system. And as I mentioned, the more renewable we will have, it will be better for all of us. So I don't see us as a competitors, rather as a complementary, as you said. And these discussions about, you know, who has the priority is also probably a moving target, because we are in a changing reality. So maybe I will pause here.
Any last questions from the audience before we wrap up? Yes, we have one up here on the lower section. Just here in the middle.
Hello, good afternoon. Many thanks. Very happy to see Baltica 2 starting. I'm Xavier Guillou. I work in maritime affairs in the European Commission, and my team work on maritime spatial planning. So the Baltic is really good on planning the space and cooperating with neighbors, and Poland has done its homework, good visibility for the years ahead. Now, as the title is about cooperation in the Baltic, what do you see next in terms of planning, infrastructure, practices? How do you get to optimize the space, investment jointly in the Baltic? So as from now that the industry is really scaling up, how do you see future work with your neighbors?
Who would like to take that?
Well, I guess we can share this question. It is multi-layered. I would say that our partnership between PGE and Ørsted, which is, you know, the thought that crossed my mind during today's panel is that offshore is more than just technology. This is more than just turbines. New factor is you know, about strengthening also the boundaries or international relations. It's strengthening about our particular partnership is also about strengthening the cooperation between two countries, Poland and Denmark. And we agreed a couple of years ago when we were forming this JV to deliver two projects, Baltica 2 and 3. So when you are asking me what is the next step here, I hope we'll be soon able to share some good news also about Baltica 3. So the project we have been developing jointly. But you know, also many other things like things about all the stuff about providing security. Like you can recall the recent NATO meeting when the countries that are sharing Baltic Sea agreed to have kind of a shared patrola. I'm missing the English word, like the shared missions of the ships, like providing security, increasing security, like providing all the technical means. Some countries have more of those, some countries have less, so like cooperation in this field. Another part would be for sure cooperation in the area of the supply chain. So for sure, for instance, Poland is right now constructing two super modern installation harbors. So for marshalling and installations of the monopiles turbines, the question is to what extent we could utilize those ports as the constructing offshore wind in other countries. So sharing some infrastructure. There is a lot of topics that could be part of this discussion.
Niels, you wanted to answer as well?
Yes. Well, I have to say it's a great pleasure for me to see the Danish-Polish cooperation. I think we can learn a lot from each other. I think you're right that it's more than just technology. It's also culture, and I think we can explore a lot of different projects that we can do together. And I would say, apart from this great project, which I would like to congratulate, I also know that we have good cooperation and upcoming projects when we talk about heating and cooling technology, and also district heating and geothermal energy. We both have, Poland and Denmark both have large district heating systems, and we both have potential for geothermal energy, for drilling down in the subsurface in the ground, and sucking up warm water that we can use in our district heating system. And here I know we already share experiences and we can learn from each other. And I also agree when it comes to defense and the military. Poland and Denmark are two countries that spend a lot of money, more than the average in the EU, for supporting Ukraine and for our defense capabilities. And I think that here we will obviously share interest and be able to work together. So I look forward to a great Danish-Polish cooperation.
Dave, just let me supplement. One more thing when it comes to cooperation. We also should have in mind the environmental protection aspects, protecting the Baltic Sea, increasing biodiversity. These are the topics that we as PGE and Ørsted are discussing together. These are the actions that we will be undertaking. So there is room also for the better cooperation around the Baltic Sea when it comes to natural environment protection and biodiversity topics.
Yep, good point, and thanks for getting that in there, because we hadn't gotten to that yet in the panel. So much more to discuss, because this is a big topic, but we'll have to wrap it up there. But at least we're ending on a nice positive note with the cooperation between Denmark and Poland, and great point that they, in terms of geothermal and in district heating, they're two countries that are leading, actually. So a lot of opportunity for cooperation there as well. I want to thank the panelists for some really stimulating discussion. I want a round of applause for them. And now I invite all of you to continue the discussion over the networking cocktail, which will take place right behind you. Have a good afternoon.
Okay, but are you